What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the Oak Tree Football Channel. And in today's video, I will be taking a look at one of the most interesting topics in college football, and that is conference realignment. So I recently on the channel, I've been doing a lot more college football videos, and for me, college football realignment is a very, very interesting topic, and I just knew I had to make a video on it. So that's what I'm doing today. So college football realignment. The conferences in college football seem to be always changing. Currently, there's 10 conferences. We've seen in the past there's been more conferences. Sometimes there's been less, though. But there's a lot to take into account of why these teams are changing conferences and why it happened at a certain time. And there's really 4 or 5 big reasons for that. One is TV deals. When the conference's TV deals expire, that's when they start to change. 2 is money. This is a no-brainer. Money is, of course, a very important aspect, really, when you take into account how these teams play each other, what conference they're in. Money, of course, is very important, and it's what, a lot of the time, that's really what some of these conferences, people that run these conferences, that's what they care about. Another thing is geography, where are these teams located? That's very important. An example of geography not being great is every year, right now, in the Big 12, colleges in Texas are playing, colleges in Texas and Oklahoma are playing West Virginia. West Virginia, every other week, basically, is playing teams in Texas and Oklahoma. That should not be happening. That does not make sense at all. So geography is very important in it. There are some things wrong with geography, like I just said, but geography is very important. The fourth reason why this happens, or how this should happen, is these teams' history. Have they been in this conference before? Just basically have the team's history. Where have they been in the past in these conferences? And the final thing is rivalries. If a team joins this conference, will they really have a rivalry game that these fans can really look out for and be excited for every year? Or are we just going to see teams that really don't have much of a rivalry just playing each other? Such as West Virginia. West Virginia, there isn't really that big of a rivalry because of this difference in geography with them and other teams in the Big 12. So those are 5 very important things to take into account. So a lot of us really do like college football. It's one of the most enjoyable sports, but there are problems with it. One of them is these conferences. Some of them are just completely messed up, like I already talked about a few times. West Virginia and the Big 12 should not be happening. That's not the only example, but that's the only one I'm going to talk about right now. But another one that I just want to quickly talk about is how many games each team plays in their conference. Right now, so personally, I believe it should be each team plays 9 in-conference games, not 8 in certain conferences. So if you did not know, right now some conferences are playing 8 in-conference games while others play 9. I do not think it should be like that. We're getting a situation where some schools are playing some small out-of-conference team while others are playing important in-conference games later in the season. I don't think that is correct at all. It should be 9 conference games for every conference, so we still get to see these out-of-conference games, but it should not be where it's just some play 9 in conference games, others play 8. That should not be the case whatsoever. It should be 9 for each. And then, so those are 2 big problems with college football, in my opinion. But those are both things that can be fixed. So for this realignment, I think there should not be any conferences under 12 teams. I think every conference should have 12 teams or more. For me, every Power 5 conference should have 12 teams. That's what I went with for this. So in this video, I'm going to be looking at the Power 5 teams and then the American Athletic Conference. I will be talking about a few other colleges, but this is really what I'm focusing on. Yes. So like I said earlier, money is super important. Money is very important in this. If it really depends how the money is going to end up. Really, that's how a big reason about this. Money is one of the most important things in this. Probably I would say money is the most important thing. It's not for the fans, but really for the owners and stuff. Money is the most important thing to them, and that's a lot of the time why we see these realignments happening. But for this video, a lot of the changes made were based on geography and the rivalries and history. I didn't focus too much on like the TV deals and stuff and the money, because there wasn't really that much I could do about that. Obviously, that will be important, but for me, this is really how I want the college football to realign. And I'm not doing something completely unrealistic. I'm doing something that I do believe is realistic. So, like I said, I think there should still be 10 conferences, 12 teams in each Power 5 conference, and 12 teams in every conference. Nothing under that, and then 9 conference games. That for me is that would be the ideal situation. But with that being said, let's get into looking at my college football realignment proposal. Alright, so the first conference I'll be taking a look at will be the ACC. The ACC is already a pretty good conference, but there are some schools that I think that aren't in the ACC that would be a better fit for the ACC. The ACC currently has 14 teams, and to limit down to 12, I have 5 schools leaving and 3 joining. The 5 schools I have leaving are Pitt, Boston College, Syracuse, Louisville, and Georgia Tech. The first 4 examples here are all pretty new to the ACC anyway, and I just think that it makes sense for them to leave. Geographically, they are pretty good, but I just think that there is a better fit for these 4 colleges. Historically, it's not the best fit either. And then the last team I'm leaving was Georgia Tech. I had Georgia Tech leaving because I wanted to introduce 3 new teams, or new colleges, and to end up with 12 teams in the conference, that would mean I need to remove 5. The first 4 wasn't hard for me to decide, but Georgia Tech was really the school that is the only other school in the ACC that I could really see leaving. I think there are some better, I think the ACC is a good fit for them, but I think there are some other conferences that could also be a good fit. So that's why I have them leaving here. And now joining, I have 3 schools. The first one being South Carolina. This one was probably the most obvious to me. South Carolina really isn't that good of a fit in the SEC, and it makes a lot more sense for them to join the ACC. They would have some good rivalries, specifically with Clemson, but maybe they could also develop one with a school like NC State, Duke, or even North Carolina. I think the ACC is a much better fit for South Carolina. And the next team I'm joining is UCF. I know some people are not going to agree with this, but I think it makes sense. UCF has been a good team in the American Athletic for a few years now, and I wouldn't be surprised if they moved up to a Power 5 conference because of that. I think the ACC would probably be the best Power 5 conference for them, as they wouldn't be the only Florida team because of Florida State. I think their level of talent, at least for the past few years, would fit well in a conference such as the ACC. So that's why I have them going there. And then the final conference I have joining is Maryland. I originally had Maryland staying in the Big Ten, but there was one more school I wanted to join in the Big Ten, and I needed to take someone out. And Maryland made the most sense to leave the Big Ten. Maryland does fit in the ACC, as they have been in the ACC in the past, and they had some good rivalries. I think overall these moves would benefit the ACC and keep it as a very good conference. So here's what my new ACC looks like. I have Virginia, North Carolina, Miami, Duke, and Virginia Tech as normal, and then of course I have Maryland, and then Wake Forest, Clemson, UCF, South Carolina, Florida State, and NC State. I think this looks like a pretty good conference. I think it would still be on a pretty high level. I think it would still be definitely considered to be a Power 5 conference, definitely considered to be a very good conference. So I think these are some good moves for the ACC, and this is what I would do for the ACC. The only team that some people might think would be in there, which I originally had, was Notre Dame, and I'll get to Notre Dame later. But I thought that there was a better fit for Notre Dame than the ACC. I think the ACC is a pretty good fit, but I think there's a better one. Notre Dame looks like it is on track to join the ACC because just of how many games they're playing against the ACC each year. If it was up to me, I would not have Notre Dame going to the ACC, but it's what I expect to happen. It probably will happen. So In that case, I would take Maryland out of this. I would probably take either Maryland or UCF out if Notre Dame was to join. I do think Notre Dame shouldn't be a member of the Independents anymore. I think they should join a conference. But overall, this is what I have for the ACC. So now moving on to the SEC, which of course is considered by most, including me, to be the best conference in college football. Just because the level of some teams, some of the schools in the SEC is what really sets them apart from the others. There are some members of the SEC though that I don't think will ever leave. Probably ever. Those include Alabama, Kentucky, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Florida, Auburn, Georgia, LSU, and potentially Tennessee and Vanderbilt. But there are a few that I have leaving though. There are some that I don't have leaving that I think could still leave. But these are the ones I have leaving. The first one is South Carolina. I already talked about them. And like I said, I don't think they're the best fit for the SEC, and I just think the ACC makes more sense for them. I'm not going to go into much detail because I already talked about it. But the SEC is a good fit for South Carolina, but I just think the ACC would be a better fit. Next up, I have Missouri. Missouri is one of the more recent schools to join the SEC, and I really don't think they fit that well. Geographically, it isn't perfect, and their rivals in the SEC are supposedly Arkansas, which just isn't the best rivalry, and I think there are definitely conferences with better rivals for them. So I just think it would be a lot more fun to see Missouri leaving the SEC and getting in a conference where we get to see more rivalries and stuff like that. And then the final college that I have joining, leaving. I have Texas A&M. I could definitely see A&M staying in the SEC because it is a pretty good fit and really helping open up the SEC to Texas, which can be good for them going forward. But I feel like there would be a better conference for them just based on rivalries. Obviously, there are other conferences with Texas teams, so it wouldn't be much of a challenge to find them a new conference. Similar to Missouri, Texas A&M joined the SEC pretty recently, so it isn't too far of a stretch to imagine them leaving the conference. Now moving on to schools I'm joining, I only have one school joining. That's Georgia Tech. I talked about earlier how I had Georgia Tech leaving the ACC, and I said there was only one other conference that really made sense to me, and to me that conference is the SEC. Obviously, Georgia Tech isn't the best football team, which might make the SEC not want them in. But I do have them joining the SEC because it would be interesting to see Georgia play Georgia Tech every season, and clearly that would be a pretty good rivalry. So with all those moves being made, this is my new SEC. Of course, 12 schools: Georgia, Vanderbilt, Georgia Tech, Tennessee, Kentucky, Florida, Auburn, Alabama, Mississippi State, Arkansas, Ole Miss, LSU. The only school I was really considering taking out, other than the ones I actually took out, was Arkansas. The other schools I think will probably stay in, if not forever, then at least for now. I think they will stay here in the SEC. Arkansas is the only one that I could see moving that I did not mention, leaving of course. But I think Georgia Tech would be a pretty good fit. I do think that some of these moves actually made the SEC better because you're really taking away, other than Texas A&M, you're really taking away some of the worst teams in the SEC. I think that's safe to say. The loss of Texas A&M probably, it might hurt a bit just because Texas A&M is a very talented football team, but the SEC would still be a very good conference if this was the case to happen. And I think these would be some good moves for the SEC. And this is my new SEC. Next up is the Pac-12. The Pac-12 is one of the easiest conferences for me to do because I don't think there are many moves that need to be made. For me, the Pac-12 is one of the worst Power 5 conferences, but it is pretty well set up. Geographically, they're almost perfect, and the rivalries make a lot of sense, which is why the Pac-12 is actually a pretty good conference when you really think about it. But there is one school I have leaving, though. Because I said geographically it's almost perfect. The one exception to that is Colorado. I have Colorado leaving because, like I said, it's almost perfect geographically. It isn't terrible geographically, but I think that there's a conference that makes more sense for them. The school I've taken their place is Boise State. I think it makes a lot more sense geographically than Colorado, and personally, because of how good Boise State has been these past years, I think they should move up to a Power 5 conference. Based on the level of that they have been recently, compared to how good the Pac-12 has been recently, I think Boise State could still contend to be a top team. So I think these moves make the Pac-12 better. And this is what I have them looking like after the moves. So it's still a pretty good conference. Oregon, Washington, Cal, Stanford, USC, Arizona State, Washington, UCLA, Utah, Boise State, Arizona, and Oregon State. This is a pretty good conference. Obviously, there are still some teams that probably won't be great, but I do think this is a good conference. I think it will make them better overall. I think it makes more sense. But like I said, the Pac-12 is really easy to do because there really isn't that many moves to be made. Like, it's almost set up perfectly. So this one was not much of a challenge to set up for me. This is my new Pac-12. The fourth conference I'm going to be talking about is the Big 12. Along with the Pac-12, I think the Big 12 is one of the worst Power 5 conferences. The Big 12 currently has 10 schools, so I would take 2 away and add 4 new ones. The first school I have leaving is West Virginia. This was a no-brainer for me. West Virginia playing teams like Texas and Oklahoma, playing teams in Texas and Oklahoma every few weeks just doesn't make much sense whatsoever. They don't really have that great rivals, and it never made sense for them to join the Big 12 in the first place. Like I said, this one was a no-brainer. The other school I'm leaving will probably surprise some people. It is Iowa State. Now, I could 100% see Iowa State staying in the Big 12, but I just think that there's more than one good fit for them, both geographically and for rivals, and to add some more teams into the Big 12, I think I decided to take them out. The Big 12 probably won't want Iowa State to leave just because of they are a good football team. But I could 100% see Iowa State staying. But for my proposal, I have them leaving. And like I said, I have 4 schools joining. Those 4 schools will be Texas A&M, Colorado, Nebraska, and Missouri. If they're not going to be in the SEC, the Big 12 definitely makes the most sense for Texas. I think it makes sense for them to go back, especially with most of the Texas colleges being in the Big 12. If they're not going to be in the SEC, they're going to be in the Big 12. I think that's pretty obvious. Like to talk about in the Pac-12 part, I think that there is a better fit for Colorado, and I think that is the Big 12. Geographically, it makes a lot of sense, and same with Nebraska. It makes a lot of sense for them to move to the Big 12. And the final school was Missouri, and just like Texas A&M, I think they'll leave the SEC to go back to the Pac-12. I just think it makes a lot of more sense. I think this would be it would make the Pac-12 a lot more sense, honestly. I think we could see a lot of good rivalries with these teams joining. So after these moves, this is how I think the Big 12 will look. Kansas, Texas Tech, Missouri, Baylor, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, OSU, Colorado, Kansas State, Nebraska, and TCU. Just so you know, that OSU was Oklahoma State, if you did not know, not Oregon State or Ohio State. So I think these moves are pretty good. I think that these moves are pretty obvious. The only one that might stay would be Iowa State. I was really on the fence about that one, but I decided to have them leaving. If anyone was to leave other than the teams that I've already taken out, I would probably say Kansas or Kansas State. But I do have them staying just because, the only reason I would have them leaving is because most of these other schools are in the same area, such as Oklahoma and Texas. That's really where the majority of these schools are from. And then the schools I introduced, I didn't want to take one of those out. So I do have Kansas and Kansas State staying. So this is my new Big 12. The final Power 5 conference is the Big 10. The Big 10 is a pretty good conference, I would say, but there are some moves that I think should be made. I expect the Big 10 moves the moves that the Big 10 will make are going to make them better by taking away some of the smaller colleges and adding some bigger ones. Starting with the teams I have leaving, for me, those teams are Northwestern, Rutgers, Nebraska, and Maryland. Northwestern was close to staying in the Big 10 for me, but I decided to eventually move them out. I think there are some other good fits for them. Even though the Big Ten does make sense, I think there are some other conferences that also make sense. Next up is Rutgers. Rutgers is pretty new to the Big Ten after being in the Big East, and I feel like it makes sense that they will leave. They haven't been that great so far, and I feel like the Big Ten won't really want them there. Then I have Nebraska. I talked about how I had Nebraska moving to the Big 12 because I just think they're a better fit there. And the final school I have leaving is Maryland. I talked about Maryland earlier when I said they would move to the ACC. I wouldn't be surprised if Maryland stays in the Big Ten, but because there were some other schools I wanted to bring to the Big Ten, I had to take them out. And now for the two schools I have joining. Those two schools are the first school I have joining is Iowa State. Like I said, Iowa State staying in. I could see Iowa State staying in the Big 12. But if they're going to move, it will probably be to the Big Ten. It would open up some big rivalry possibilities, especially against Iowa. I know some people won't agree with this one, but I just like the possibilities if it was to happen. And the other school I'm joining is Notre Dame. Now, before you say Notre Dame should go to the ACC, hear me out. Geographically, Notre Dame to the Big Ten makes a lot more sense than the ACC. There's no question there. But also, it would open the door to some big rivalry windows, such as potentially Purdue, Indiana, Michigan, Michigan State, and then even with someone like Penn State or Ohio State. Competition-wise, the Big Ten makes more sense for Notre Dame. And even though it looks like they're going to go to the ACC, the Big Ten makes a lot more sense for me. So after these moves, this is what I have the Big Ten looking like. Michigan, Illinois, Ohio State, Iowa, Purdue, Notre Dame, Penn State, Indiana, Iowa State, Michigan State, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. This would be a very good conference because you're really taking away some of the worst teams in the conference and you're replacing them with good ones. Currently, most people would say SEC is the best conference, but if the Big Ten was to make these moves, this could be called the best conference because there are a lot of teams that have been good in the past and that can be good in the future in this conference. So if these moves were to happen, because if you're bringing in Iowa State and Notre Dame, two very good colleges, and then you're getting rid of some of your newer colleges that haven't really been that great. Northwestern's been okay, but the other three have been they've lost a lot. They're not winning teams. And to get rid of those teams and then replace them with teams that actually win games, I think that would be perfect for the Big Ten. I think these are some really, really good moves for them. And then the final conference I'll be looking at today will be the American Athletic Conference. The American Athletic is definitely the best non-Power 5 conference in my opinion, and probably in most other people's as well. And some of the moves I have them making will probably make them even better. Leaving, I have Tulane, UCF, Tulsa, and East Carolina. Tulane doesn't make terrible sense for the American Athletic. They aren't that great compared to some of the other teams I'm joining, and I think the American Athletic will be fine with them leaving. The loss of UCF is the only one that actually will probably hurt. Like I said earlier, I think it does make sense for UCF to join a Power 5 conference, so that's why I have them leaving. Tulsa is like Tulane, and for some college football fans, they don't even know who East Carolina is, so I think it makes sense that they should leave. And then joining, I actually have 7 schools. The first 4 schools are Pitt, Boston College, Syracuse, and Louisville, which are all schools that I had leaving from the ACC. I know some of the fans of those schools won't like this because it gives them a worse chance at the playoff. But soon I'm going to make a video where I make making the playoffs easier for American athletic teams. Because I just think that's fair, because right now it does not look like we're ever going to have an American athletic school making the playoffs. But we have seen some good ones over the years, but I'll talk more about that in my playoff video. But the next school I had joining is West Virginia, which I think is safe to say makes a lot more sense than the Big 12. And then the final 2 schools I'm leaving is Rutgers and Northwestern. I have Rutgers and Northwestern leaving the Big 10, and I think the American Athletic is a conference that makes the most sense for them. Just based on talent levels. I think the talent levels are pretty similar, and pretty geographically wise, they're pretty good. It's not perfect, but it's not terrible either. After these moves, this is what I have the American Athletic looking like. Other than the loss of UCF, I think it would be very good moves, and I think it would make the American Athletic a very, very good conference because it keeps most of the good teams such as Memphis and Cincinnati, while also adding some other teams that could be good like Pitt, Louisville, and all the others. I seriously think this can be considered to be a Power 6 conference because I think the additions would make it good enough. The only problem is this conference has 4 teams, which would break the rule of all Power 5 conferences having only 12 teams. But so these moves look really good. If the American Athletic was able to do this, I think it would end up very well for them. And like I said, I think they could be classified as a Power 6 conference. So one more thing I just want to quickly talk about before I end this video. These are a few schools that I think could be moving conference as well, whether it be just to a smaller conference or even maybe to look out for them to move to a bigger conference. So these schools I have are New Mexico State, BYU, Appalachian State, and Army. New Mexico State, I think there's a lot of potential there for a move. I'm really looking at the Mountain West. BYU is an independent right now, but there are some moves that could be made potentially to the Mountain West. Next, I have Appalachian State. Appalachian State is a school that I think deserves a move. You really look at it, and they've just dominated for many years now in their conference, and they have proved that they can beat pretty good teams as well, or at least be close to them. And they have a very good fan base. I think Appalachian State is someone to look out for to move. I was really considering putting them on the American Athletic, but there wasn't any space left, so I left them out. But if I was going to add one more team into the American Athletic, or if I had to take someone out and add someone new in, 100% Appalachian State would be going in because I really do think they deserve a conference, of at least a new conference other than the one they have right now. And then the other one is Army. I just think that they should go to a different conference somewhere. That's my opinion. And then now some FCS schools quickly that don't have a conference. These schools are James Madison. James Madison has been pretty good in the FCS for a few years now. I think this one makes sense. Next up is North Dakota State, Ndsu. This one is probably the most obvious to people. I don't think it's going to happen, though, because I really don't think that North Dakota State wants to leave the FCS, but they've just been so dominant in the FCS for many years, and I would not be surprised if they did move up. I don't think they will, but I know that some of their fans probably will, and they're going to be interesting, especially when conference realignment rolls around, if they're going to move up or if they're going to stay where they are right now. Next up, I have Villanova. I really think Villanova could move up. I wouldn't be surprised if it happened. Next up is North Carolina A&T. They've been pretty good in the FCS for a few years now, and I think they can deserve a spot to move up. And then finally, I have Delaware. Delaware is a pretty good school in the FCS, and I think it would make sense for them to move up. So that's going to be it from me for this video. Tell me, guys, tell me in the comment section how you would realign college football, because it's a very interesting topic for me, and I really am interested to hear what you guys think about it. But anyways, thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, and if you're new around here, feel free to subscribe. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next video.